What if the woman who walked out of your life 10 years ago suddenly appeared at your front door with 4 identical children, claiming they were yours? But the birth certificates revealed a secret so shocking it would destroy everything you thought you knew about love, betrayal, and family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Daniel Blackwood's penthouse office, each droplet creating rivulets that distorted the Chicago skyline beyond. At 42, Daniel had built an empire that stretched across 3 continents, his investment firm handling portfolios worth more than some countries' GDP. The mahogany desk before him bore the weight of contracts that could shift entire markets. Yet his attention wandered to the storm outside. 10 years. 10 years since Rebecca Martinez had walked out of his life with nothing but a suitcase and words that still echoed in the silence of his success. She had accused him of loving money more than people, of choosing deals over dreams, of being incapable, of putting anything before his relentless pursuit of wealth. The worst part was, she had been right. Daniel's assistant, Margaret, knocked softly before entering. At 65, she had witnessed his transformation from an ambitious young broker to the calculating titan he had become. Her expression carried an unusual mixture of concern and bewilderment. "Sir, there's a situation downstairs that requires your immediate attention," Margaret said, her voice carefully measured. "If it's reporters, have security escort them out. I'm not giving any interviews about the Morrison acquisition," Daniel replied, without looking up from his documents. "It's not reporters, Mr. Blackwood. It's a woman with 4 children. She claims to know you personally and insists she won't leave until she speaks with you." Daniel's pen stopped moving across the page. Something in Margaret's tone suggested this was far from an ordinary encounter. He had dealt with desperate investors, angry competitors, and even the occasional unhinged individual seeking his attention, but Margaret's carefully neutral expression indicated this was different. "Did she give a name?" he asked, though a growing unease in his stomach suggested he already knew the answer. "Rebecca Martinez. She says to tell you that some conversations can't wait another decade." The pen slipped from Daniel's fingers, clattering onto the polished desk surface. Rebecca. After 10 years of silence, 10 years of carefully constructed barriers around his heart, she had simply appeared like a ghost from his past. But children? Rebecca had never mentioned wanting children during their tumultuous 3-year relationship. In fact, one of their many arguments had centered on his assumption that children would interfere with their careers. "4 children, you said?" Daniel asked, his voice betraying nothing of the turmoil building inside him. "Yes, sir. They appear to be identical quadruplets, approximately 9 or 10 years old. Security is understandably uncertain about how to proceed, given the unusual nature of the situation." Daniel stood slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. Rebecca had disappeared from Chicago entirely after their breakup, and despite his considerable resources, he had never attempted to track her down. Pride, perhaps, or the stubborn belief that she would eventually realize her mistake and return. Now she was here, a decade later, with 4 children in tow. "Send them up," he said finally. "And Margaret, cancel my afternoon appointments." "All of them, sir, including the conference call with the Tokyo investors?" "All of them." Margaret nodded and retreated, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts and the persistent drumming of rain against the windows. He walked to the bathroom adjacent to his office, splashing cold water on his face and studying his reflection in the mirror. The years had been kind to him in some ways and harsh in others. His dark hair now carried threads of silver at the temples, and lines had formed around his eyes from countless hours staring at financial reports and market projections. Success had given him everything he thought he wanted, but it had also carved away pieces of himself he was only now beginning to miss. The sound of the elevator arriving on his floor broke through his contemplation. Daniel returned to his office, positioning himself behind his desk in an unconscious attempt to maintain some barrier between himself and whatever was about to unfold. He heard Margaret's voice in the reception area, followed by lighter voices that sent an unexpected chill down his spine. The office door opened, and Rebecca Martinez stepped inside, followed by 4 identical children who moved with the careful synchronization that often develops between siblings raised in close quarters. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight before him. Rebecca looked remarkably unchanged, though her once flowing black hair was now pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her clothes spoke of comfort rather than fashion. At 38, she retained the graceful bearing that had first caught his attention at a charity gala years ago. But there was a new strength in her posture, a confidence born of trials he could only imagine. The children, however, commanded his immediate attention. 4 identical boys with dark hair and serious expressions, each clutching a small backpack and studying Daniel with an intensity that felt oddly familiar. They appeared to be around 9 years old, though their composed demeanor suggested a maturity beyond their years. "Hello, Daniel," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the same melodic quality that had once filled his penthouse with laughter and heated debates about literature and life. "You look well." Rebecca. He struggled to find words adequate to the moment. "It's been a long time. 10 years, 3 months, and 16 days, she replied with a precision that suggested she had been counting. But who's keeping track? An uncomfortable silence settled over the room as Daniel's gaze moved between Rebecca and the 4 boys who stood like sentinels beside her. The resemblance between them was striking, but there was something else, something that nagged at the edges of his consciousness. "I'd like you to meet my sons," Rebecca continued, her hand coming to rest on the shoulder of the nearest boy. "This is Gabriel, Michael, Raphael, and Samuel. Boys, this is Mr. Blackwood, the man I've told you about." Gabriel, who appeared to be the unofficial spokesperson for the group, stepped forward slightly. "Mom says you used to be important to her," he said with the directness that only children can manage. "Your mother was very important to me too," Daniel replied, kneeling down to bring himself closer to their eye level. "It's nice to meet all of you." Michael, distinguished only by a small scar on his chin, studied Daniel with an a gaze that seemed far too mature for his age. "You have the same eyes as us," he observed matter-of-factly. The comment hit Daniel like a physical blow. Now that the boy had mentioned it, the resemblance was unmistakable. All 4 children shared his distinctive green eyes, the same shade that had been a trademark of the Blackwood family for generations. The same eyes that stared back at him from every family portrait in his childhood home. "Rebecca," Daniel said, slowly rising to his full height, "we need to talk, privately. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." She nodded toward the children. "Boys, why don't you explore the waiting area? Margaret has some books and games out there for you." "Stay where Margaret can see you," Gabriel instructed his brothers with an authority that spoke of practiced responsibility. "And remember what we discussed about touching expensive things." After the children had filed out, closing the door behind them, Daniel turned to face Rebecca with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The office, which had always felt like his sanctuary, now seemed charged with an energy that made the air itself feel electric. 10 years, Rebecca. 10 years without a word, and now you show up with 4 children who look exactly like me when I was their age. I think I deserve an explanation." Rebecca moved to the window, gazing out at the storm-darkened city below. "Do you remember our last conversation, Daniel? Because I remember every word." He remembered. The fight had been spectacular, even by their standards. Rebecca had accused him of being emotionally unavailable, of treating their relationship like another business transaction to be optimized and eventually discarded when it no longer served his purposes. He had responded with cold logic, explaining that her expectations were unrealistic and that successful people couldn't afford to be governed by sentiment. "You told me that love was a luxury you couldn't afford," Rebecca continued without turning around, "that building an empire required sacrifices that people like me would never understand. You made it very clear that your ambitions came first, second, and third, and that everything else was just background noise." "I was young and stupid," Daniel said quietly, "and scared." "Scared of what?" "Of failing. Of not living up to the expectations that had been placed on me since childhood, of proving that the people who said I was nothing without my family's money were right." Rebecca finally turned to face him, and he saw tears glistening in her eyes. "I was pregnant. Daniel, when I left, I was 8 weeks pregnant with your children." The words hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. Daniel sank into his chair, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. "Pregnant? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew exactly what would have happened. You would have offered to marry me out of duty, resented me for trapping you, and eventually blamed me for derailing your precious career. I couldn't live with that. And I couldn't subject my children to a father who saw them as obstacles to overcome. So you decided to raise them alone for 10 years? I decided to give them a father who chose them every single day rather than one who stayed out of obligation. I moved to Denver, finished my master's degree, and built a life for us." Daniel ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the magnitude of what Rebecca was telling him. 4 children, quadruplets. Do you have any idea how rare that is? 1 in 700,000 pregnancies, Rebecca said with a slight smile. Michael looked it up. He's very interested in statistics and probability. "Why now?" Daniel asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" Rebecca's expression grew serious, and she reached into her purse to pull out a manila envelope. "Because they're getting older, and they're starting to ask questions I can't answer, because I made a mistake thinking I could protect them from wanting to know their father, and because..." She hesitated, her voice growing softer. "Because I need your help." Daniel accepted the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were 4 birth certificates, each bearing the name of one of his sons and listing Rebecca Martinez as the mother. Where the father's name should have been listed, there was only a blank space. "You left it blank," he said, studying the documents. "I wasn't ready to put your name there without your consent, but more importantly, there's something else you need to see." Rebecca reached into her purse again and pulled out a second envelope, this one marked with the letterhead of Denver General Hospital. Daniel opened it to find medical records for all 4 boys, including detailed genetic testing results. As he read through the documents, his confusion grew. The tests showed genetic markers that didn't match what he would have expected from his and Rebecca's DNA. There were anomalies, inconsistencies that made no medical sense. "I don't understand," Daniel said, looking up from the papers. "These results suggest that the boys aren't, that they're not genetically related to either of us," Rebecca finished. "At least not in the way you'd expect." Daniel stared at her in bewilderment. "How is that possible?" Rebecca took a deep breath before continuing. "The quadruplets were the result of a fertility treatment I underwent after I left Chicago. I was having complications with the pregnancy, and the doctors discovered that my body was rejecting the embryos. They tried an experimental procedure that involved using genetic material from multiple sources to ensure viability. Multiple sources? The procedure used your genetic material, which I had stored from when we were together, but it also incorporated genetic sequences from an anonymous donor to ensure the pregnancies would be successful. Daniel felt the world spinning around him. You stored my genetic material. We talked about having children someday, remember? Before everything fell apart, we had discussed the possibility of starting a family. I had samples stored just in case. When I found out I was pregnant and the doctors said there might be complications, they used those samples as part of the treatment. So the boys are mine, but not entirely mine. They're ours, Daniel. They carry genetic material from both of us, but the procedure means their DNA is more complex than a typical parent-child relationship. It's why they look so much like you, but why the genetic tests show those anomalies. Daniel studied the medical documents again, his mind struggling to process the scientific implications. This is impossible. This technology doesn't exist. It's experimental, and it's not widely available. The clinic in Denver was conducting trials for couples with severe fertility issues. The success rate was less than 5%, but it worked. For us. Us? You included me in this decision without telling me? Rebecca's composure finally cracked, and tears began flowing freely down her cheeks. I was desperate, Daniel. The doctor said without intervention, I would lose all 4 babies. I had to make a choice in a matter of hours, and I chose to save them using whatever means necessary. Daniel stood and walked to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked city, while his mind raced through the implications of Rebecca's revelation. 4 children who were his sons, but not entirely his sons. A woman who had carried his genetic legacy forward without his knowledge or consent. A decade of missed opportunities to be part of their lives. What do you want from me, Rebecca? He asked without turning around. I want you to meet your sons, really meet them. They deserve to know their father, and you deserve to know them. And if I say no, then we'll leave and you'll never see us again. But I'm hoping that 10 years has changed you enough to make a different choice this time. Daniel turned to face her, studying the woman who had once been the center of his world and was now asking him to embrace a reality that defied everything he thought he knew about family, genetics, and responsibility. Outside the office, he could hear the muffled voices of 4 boys who shared his eyes and his stubborn determination. Boys who had grown up without knowing their father's name, but who had somehow inherited his analytical mind and his protective instincts. Boys who were his sons, in ways that science was only beginning to understand. I need time to process this, Daniel said finally. How much time? Give me a week. I need to verify these medical records, consult with experts, and figure out what this means legally and practically. Rebecca nodded, though disappointment flickered across her features. The boys and I are staying at the Marriott downtown. Here's my number. She handed him a business card with her contact information. Call me when you're ready. As she moved toward the door, Daniel found himself speaking before he had consciously decided to do so. Rebecca, wait. She paused, her hand on the Deuter handle. Those boys out there, do they know who I am? They know you're someone important from my past. They know I cared about you very much. They don't know you're their father, but they're smart enough to have figured out that this isn't a casual social visit. What do they think about meeting me? Rebecca smiled for the first time since entering his office. Gabriel thinks you look like someone who needs more laughter in his life. Michael wants to know how many languages you speak and whether you understand advanced mathematics. Raphael noticed that you have expensive taste in furniture, but that none of it looks comfortable. And Samuel asked if you have any pets because he thinks lonely people should have dogs. Despite everything, Daniel found himself smiling. They sound like remarkable boys. They are. And whether you decide to be part of their lives or not, I want you to know that I've told them their father was brilliant, ambitious, and capable of great love. I've never spoken badly about you to them. Thank you for that. It wasn't for you, Daniel. It was for them. Every child deserves to think well of their parents. After Rebecca and the boys left, Daniel stood alone in his office holding the medical documents that had turned his understanding of family upside down. The rain continued to streak down the windows, and the city lights began to flicker on as evening approached. Margaret knocked and entered, carrying a cup of coffee, and wearing an expression of carefully controlled curiosity. "Sir, shall I reschedule your afternoon appointments for tomorrow?" "Cancel them entirely," Daniel said, still staring at the papers in his hands. "And the Tokyo call? Handle it yourself. You know my positions on the key issues." Margaret set down the coffee and studied him with the concern of someone who had watched him navigate countless crises. "Sir, if you don't mind me saying, you look like you've seen a ghost." Daniel looked up at her, this woman who had been more of a mother figure to him than his own mother had ever been. "Margaret, what do you know about advanced fertility treatments?" "Only what I've read in the news, sir. Why do you ask?" "I need you to find me the best genetic specialists in the country. I need consultations with experts in experimental fertility treatments, and I need complete background checks on a clinic in Denver called Advanced Reproductive Solutions." "Of course, sir. Anything else?" Daniel hesitated, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow. All of it." "Sir? I'm going to have lunch with 4 9-year-old boys, and I suspect I'm going to need all my energy for that conversation." That night, Daniel sat in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by the trappings of success that had once felt so important. The abstract art on the walls, the imported furniture, the view that had cost him millions, all of it felt hollow in the face of what he had learned that afternoon. He walked to his study and pulled out a photo album he hadn't opened in years. Inside were pictures from his relationship with Rebecca, vacations they had taken, parties they had attended, quiet moments captured when they thought no one was watching. In one photo, they were laughing at something off camera, her head thrown. Back in delight, while he gazed at her with an expression of pure adoration. He remembered taking that photo. They had been discussing their dreams for the future, building castles in the air about the life they might create together. Rebecca had mentioned wanting children someday, and he had surprised himself by finding the idea appealing. But that was before the pressure of building his empire had consumed every waking moment, before he had convinced himself that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. Now, 10 years later, those theoretical children had names, and faces and personalities. Gabriel, who thought he needed more laughter. Michael, who loved statistics and probability. Raphael, who noticed that expensive furniture wasn't always comfortable. Samuel, who believed lonely people should have dogs. Daniel closed the album and walked to his bedroom, but sleep eluded him. Instead, he found himself researching advanced fertility treatments, genetic anomalies, and the legal implications of paternity in cases involving experimental medical procedures. The more he read, the more he realized that Rebecca's story, however impossible it seemed, was grounded in cutting-edge science that few people understood. By morning, he had made several decisions that would have seemed unthinkable just 24 hours earlier. He was going to meet his sons properly, whatever that meant. He was going to learn everything there was to know about the scientific miracle that had brought them into existence. And he was going to figure out how to be the father they deserved, even if it meant dismantling the carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart. The storm had passed during the night, leaving Chicago gleaming under a crisp autumn sun. As Daniel prepared for what might be the most important meeting of his life, he caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. Once again, the same green eyes that had stared back at him for 42 years now carried a new weight of responsibility and possibility. Somewhere across the city, 4 boys who shared those eyes were waking up in a hotel room, probably wondering if the serious man in the expensive suit would want to see them again. Daniel intended to make sure they never had to wonder about that again. The future, which had always seemed so carefully planned and predictable, had suddenly become an adventure filled with uncertainty and hope. And for the first time in 10 years, Daniel Blackwood was genuinely excited to see what came next. The Lincoln Park Zoo hummed with the excited chatter of families enjoying the unusually warm October afternoon. Daniel stood near the entrance, checking his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. He had suggested meeting Rebecca and the boys somewhere neutral, somewhere that might help ease the inevitable awkwardness of their second encounter. The zoo had seemed like a safe choice, though now he wondered if he had simply been overthinking everything. Margaret had spent the previous day arranging consultations with 3 different genetic specialists, all of whom had confirmed that Rebecca's story was not only possible, but represented some of the most advanced reproductive science being conducted anywhere in the world. The Denver clinic had a reputation for pushing boundaries, though their success rates remained frustratingly low. The boys represented one of fewer than a dozen successful cases of the experimental procedure Rebecca had described. A familiar voice calling his name broke through Daniel's contemplation. He turned to see Rebecca approaching with the 4 boys, each carrying a small backpack and wearing matching expressions of cautious curiosity. In the daylight, away from the sterile environment of his office, the family resemblance was even more striking. The boys moved with the same confident stride that Daniel recognized from his own reflection, and their analytical approach to studying their surroundings reminded him of his younger self. "Mr. Blackwood," Gabriel said, extending his hand with the formality of someone much older than his 9 years. "Thank you for inviting us today." Daniel shook the boy's hand, impressed by the firm grip and direct eye contact. "Please call me Daniel, and thank you for coming." Michael stepped forward, his backpack bulging with what appeared to be several thick books. "I brought some reading material about primate behavior and zoo conservation efforts. I thought it might enhance our educational experience." "Indeed, Michael reads everything," Raphael explained with the patient tone of someone accustomed to his brother's intellectual intensity. "Yesterday, he finished a book about quantum physics." "It was actually about quantum mechanics," Michael corrected, "and I only understood about 60% of it, but the mathematical principles were fascinating." Samuel, who had remained quiet during the exchange, suddenly pointed toward the zoo entrance. "Do they really have lions here? Real ones?" "They do," Daniel confirmed, finding himself smiling at the boy's obvious excitement. "Would you like to see them first?" The next 3 hours passed more quickly than Daniel had anticipated. The boys proved to be engaging companions, each bringing their unique perspective to every exhibit they encountered. Gabriel demonstrated natural leadership skills, organizing their route through the zoo and ensuring that everyone's interests were accommodated. Michael provided a running commentary on animal behavior that impressed even the zoo staff they encountered. Raphael showed a keen artistic eye, sketching animals in a notebook he carried and pointing out details that others missed. Samuel's enthusiastic questions and genuine wonder reminded Daniel of the joy that could be found in simple discoveries. Rebecca walked alongside them, occasionally offering gentle guidance, but mostly allowing Daniel to interact with the boys directly. She seemed content to observe, and Daniel caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Pride, perhaps, or satisfaction at seeing him engage with their sons in ways she had probably never expected. "Daniel," Gabriel said as they approached the great ape house, "Mom told us you're very successful in business. What exactly do you do?" Daniel considered how to explain investment banking to a 9-year-old. "I help people and companies make smart decisions about money. When someone wants to start a new business or expand an existing one, they often need more money than they have. My company helps them find that money and figure out the best way to use it." "Like a bank?" Samuel asked. "Similar to a bank, but more specialized. We also help people invest their money so it can grow over time." Michael looked up from the informational plaque he had been reading. Investment growth typically follows exponential rather than linear patterns, assuming consistent market performance and compound interest calculations. Daniel stared at the boy in amazement. "That's exactly right. How do you know about compound interest?" "I read about it in a book about personal finance. The mathematical principles are quite elegant, actually." "Michael wants to be an economist when he grows up," Rebecca said, pride evident in her voice. "Or a mathematician, or possibly a theoretical physicist. He hasn't decided yet." "You don't have to choose just one thing," Daniel found himself saying. "I studied economics and mathematics in college, but I also took classes in psychology and philosophy. Understanding how people think and make decisions turned out to be just as important as understanding numbers." Raphael looked up from his sketchbook. "What did you want to be when you were our age?" The question caught Daniel off guard. He realized that no one had asked him about his childhood dreams in decades. "I wanted to be an architect," he said, slowly. "I loved designing buildings and imagining how they would change the skylines of cities." "Why didn't you?" Gabriel asked with typical directness. "I suppose I got distracted by other opportunities. Sometimes life takes you in directions you don't expect." "Do you regret it?" Samuel asked quietly. Daniel considered the question seriously. "I used to think regret was pointless, that focusing on the past prevented you from moving forward. But lately I've been wondering if maybe some regrets are worth having, because they remind us of the things that truly mattered to us." The conversation was interrupted by Samuel's excited shout as he spotted the lion exhibit. The 4 boys pressed against the viewing windows, marveling at the magnificent animals lounging in the afternoon sun. Daniel found himself standing next to Rebecca, both of them watching their sons with a mixture of amazement and protective instinct. "They're incredible," Daniel said softly. "All 4 of them." "They get that from both of us," Rebecca replied. "Gabriel has your determination and leadership instincts. Michael inherited your analytical mind, but also my love of learning for its own sake. Raphael combines your attention to detail with my artistic sensibilities. And Samuel has your curiosity about the world mixed with my optimism." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest as he watched the boys. "I've missed so much." "You've missed the sleepless nights when they were babies, the emergency room visits when they learned to climb, the parent-teacher conferences about Michael's tendency to correct his teachers, Gabriel's protective streak, getting him into trouble when someone picked on his brothers, Raphael's quiet tears when he thought his art wasn't good enough, and Samuel's nightmares about losing the people he loves." The words hit Daniel like physical blows. "Rebecca, but you've also missed their first words, their first steps, the pride in their eyes when they mastered something difficult, the way they comfort each other when one of them is hurt, and the absolute joy they bring to everything." "They do." Daniel turned to face her fully. "I want to be part of their lives. I want to learn who they are and help them become who they're meant to be." "That's a big commitment, Daniel. They don't need another adult who drifts in and out of their lives when it's convenient. They need consistency, reliability, and unconditional love." "I know, and I know I haven't exactly demonstrated those qualities in the past." Rebecca studied his face carefully. "What's changed?" Daniel looked back at the boys, who were now engaged in an animated discussion about lion social structures. Meeting them changed everything. Seeing pieces of myself reflected in 4 completely unique individuals, realizing that I helped create something beautiful and important, understanding that success means nothing if you don't have people to share it with. Pretty words, Daniel, but words are easy. Then give me a chance to prove it with actions. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, watching as Samuel attempted to roar like the lions while his brothers laughed at his efforts. They go to school during the week, of course, but weekends are usually free. Saturday mornings they have soccer practice, and Sunday afternoons they volunteer at the animal shelter near our hotel. They volunteer at an animal shelter? Samuel's idea. He's convinced that every homeless animal just needs someone to believe in them. Daniel felt another piece of his carefully constructed worldview crumble. 9-year-old boys volunteering their free time to help animals. When he was their age, his weekends had been filled with structured activities designed to build his resume for future college applications. Could I join them at the shelter? Rebecca looked surprised. You want to volunteer at an animal shelter? I want to spend time with my sons doing things that matter to them. The work isn't glamorous. It's mostly cleaning cages, feeding animals, and providing basic care. Not exactly the sophisticated entertainment you're probably used to. Rebecca, in the past 24 hours, I've learned that I have 4 children who exist because of a medical miracle, that I've spent 10 years missing out on the most important relationships of my life, and that my definition of success has been completely wrong. I think I can handle cleaning some cages. A small smile played at the corners of Rebecca's mouth. All right, we'll pick you up at your building Sunday at noon. Wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty. As they prepared to leave the zoo, Gabriel approached Daniel with a serious expression. Daniel, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you planning to stick around, or is this just a temporary thing? The directness of the question from such a young person caught Daniel off guard, but he recognized the protective instinct behind it. Gabriel was looking out for his brothers, making sure they wouldn't be hurt by an adult who might disappear as suddenly as he had appeared. I'm planning to stick around, Daniel said carefully. Your mother and I have a lot to figure out, but I want to be part of your lives, if you'll let me. Gabriel studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good. But if you change your mind, tell us directly. Don't just disappear. I promise. Gabriel worries about everyone, Rebecca explained as they walked toward the parking area. He's been the man of the house since they were old enough to understand that concept. That's a lot of responsibility for a 9-year-old. It is, but he's handled it remarkably well. As they reached Rebecca's rental car, Michael approached with his backpack of books. Daniel, do you have any recommendations for reading material about business and economics? I'd like to understand more about what you do. Daniel thought for a moment. There are some excellent books written specifically for young people about how money and markets work. I could put together a list for you. That would be excellent. I learn better from reading than from explanations. Raphael, who had been quietly sketching during the walk to the car, tore a page from his notebook and handed it to Daniel. The drawing showed the 5 of them standing together at the lion exhibit, captured with remarkable detail and skill for someone so young. This is incredible, Daniel said, studying the artwork. You have real talent. Mum says talent is just the starting point. The important thing is practicing and learning and never giving up on improving. Your mother is very wise. Samuel, meanwhile, had been collecting interesting rocks from the zoo's landscaping, his pockets bulging with his treasures. Daniel, do you know anything about geology? Not much, I'm afraid, but I know someone who does. Would you like me to introduce you to her? She's a professor at Northwestern University. Samuel's eyes lit up. Really? A real geologist? a real geologist who studies rocks from all over the world. As the boys climbed into the car, Rebecca lingered beside Daniel. "They like you," she said simply. "I like them too, more than I expected." "Don't break their hearts, Daniel. They've been through enough disappointment." "I won't, I promise. Promises are easy to make and hard to keep." "Then judge me by my actions, not my words." Sunday arrived grey and drizzly, the kind of Chicago weather that made staying indoors seem like the sensible choice. Daniel stood in his penthouse closet, staring at clothes that suddenly seemed inappropriate for their intended purpose. His casual wear consisted primarily of expensive designer items that were meant to look casual while still projecting success and sophistication. Finally, he settled on jeans that had cost more than most people spent on clothing in a month, and a simple button-down shirt that probably wasn't suitable for animal shelter work, but was the most practical option he owned. He made a mental note to go shopping for more appropriate clothes, then realized that even that thought represented a fundamental shift in his priorities. Rebecca and the boys arrived precisely at noon, and Daniel found himself genuinely excited to see them again. The weekend break had given him time to process the magnitude of the changes happening in his life, and he had spent Saturday researching animal shelters, volunteering guidelines, and the proper care of rescue animals. "Ready for this?" Rebecca asked as Daniel climbed into the passenger seat of her rental car. "Probably not, but I'm willing to learn." The Happy Tales Animal Shelter occupied a converted warehouse on Chicago's South Side, far from the gleaming towers and manicured neighborhoods where Daniel typically spent his time. The building showed its age, but the grounds were well maintained, and he could hear the sound of barking dogs even before they entered. "Remember," Gabriel instructed his brothers as they approached the entrance. "Slow movements around the scared animals, and always let them sniff your hand before trying to pet them. And don't take it personally if they don't want attention right away," Michael added. "Many of these animals have experienced trauma that affects their ability to trust humans. Some of them just need time to remember that people can be good," Samuel said softly. Daniel followed the family inside, where they were greeted by a woman in her 50s wearing scrubs covered in animal hair and disinfectant stains. Her face lit up when she saw the boys. "My favorite volunteers are here!" she exclaimed. "And you brought a friend." "This is Daniel," Rebecca said. "He'd like to help out today if that's possible." The woman, who introduced herself as Linda, looked Daniel up and down with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to evaluating potential volunteers. "First time?" "Yes, ma'am." "Well, you're certainly dressed nicely for mucking out kennels. We'll start you with something easy and see how you do." For the next 4 hours, Daniel learned more about animal care, compassion, and the meaning of hard work than he had absorbed in the previous decade. Linda assigned him to basic cleaning duties, while the boys, who were clearly experienced volunteers, took on more complex tasks. He watched Gabriel work with a nervous rescue dog, patiently sitting near the animal's kennel and speaking in soothing tones until the dog finally approached the gate. The boy's natural leadership extended to his interactions with animals. Daniel realized as other volunteers began following Gabriel's lead in handling difficult cases. Michael had stationed himself in the cat area, where his analytical mind proved useful in observing and documenting animal behavior patterns that would help with adoption matches. He maintained detailed notes about each cat's personality, preferences, and social needs, approaching the task with the same intensity he brought to his academic studies. Raphael moved through the shelter with an artist's eye, sketching animals in ways that captured their individual personalities. Linda explained that his drawings were often used in adoption flyers because they showed potential pet owners the unique character of each animal, rather than just their physical appearance. Samuel, meanwhile, seemed to have a supernatural ability. to connect with the most traumatized animals. Daniel watched in amazement as the boy sat quietly beside a kennel housing a dog that Linda explained had been severely abused and hadn't allowed human contact since arriving at the shelter 3 weeks earlier. How does he do that? Daniel asked Rebecca as they watched Samuel slowly extend his hand toward the fearful animal. He's always been able to sense what others need, Rebecca replied. Even as a baby, he could calm his brothers when they were upset. It's like he understands emotional pain in ways most people never learn. And you've been raising all 4 of them by yourself? With help from my sister and some wonderful friends. But yes, essentially by myself. Daniel felt a familiar tightness in his chest as he considered the magnitude of what Rebecca had accomplished. Raising one child as a single parent was challenging enough. Raising 4 children, each with distinct needs and personalities, while building a career and maintaining her own emotional well-being seemed almost impossible. I should have been there, he said quietly. Daniel, we've been through this. You made the choice that seemed right to you at the time, and I made the choice. That seemed right to me. We can't change the past, but we can change the future. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, watching as Samuel finally managed to touch the traumatized dog's nose through the kennel bars. What does that mean exactly? Changing the future? It means I want to be their father, not just biologically, but actively, consistently, completely. That's a bigger commitment than you might realize. They don't need a weekend dad or someone who shows up for the good times and disappears when things get difficult. I know. Do you? Because parenting means 2 a.m. phone calls when they're scared. It means sitting through school plays where they forget their lines and soccer games where they spend more time picking dandelions than playing. It means helping with homework you don't understand and having the same conversation about responsibility 17 times before it finally sinks in. Daniel watched his sons working throughout the shelter, each demonstrating character traits that filled him with pride and wonder. I want all of it, the good and the difficult, and everything in between. Why? What's changed in 10 years? That makes you think you're ready for this kind of responsibility? Daniel considered the question carefully. Meeting them changed me. Seeing what you've accomplished with them, understanding what I've missed, realizing that all the success in the world means nothing if you don't have people who matter to share it with. Pretty words again. Then let me prove it. Give me a chance to show you that I'm serious about this. Rebecca watched as Gabriel successfully coaxed the nervous dog out of its kennel for the first time since its arrival. They deserve better than a father who's still figuring out what commitment means. They deserve a father who's willing to learn and grow and put their needs first. I may not have much experience with children, but I'm a fast learner, and I've never wanted anything more than I want to be part of their lives. And when your business demands conflict with their needs, when being a good father means missing important meetings or turning down profitable opportunities. Daniel thought about his conversation with Margaret the previous Friday, when he had cancelled an entire day's worth of appointments without hesitation. Then the business will have to adapt. I've spent 20 years building an empire. If I can't figure out how to run it while being present for my children, then I haven't been as successful as I thought. Rebecca turned to study his face, searching for any sign that his words were hollow promises meant to manipulate the situation. This isn't a business deal, Daniel. You can't negotiate your way into their hearts or buy their affection with expensive gifts. I know, and I know I have a lot to learn about being a father, but I also know that walking away from them now would be the biggest mistake of my life. Linda approached them, wiping her hands on a towel and smiling broadly. Your boys are amazing, she said to Rebecca. And your friend here isn't bad either, once he stopped worrying about getting dirty. Daniel looked down at his clothes, which were now thoroughly stained with various animal-related substances. The expensive jeans would probably never recover, and his shirt bore evidence of his encounters with several particularly affectionate cats. I told him to wear something he didn't mind ruining, Rebecca said with amusement. Everything I own costs more than it should, Daniel admitted. I need to go shopping for more practical clothes. Good attitude, Linda said approvingly. 2. Many people come in here thinking they can help without getting their hands dirty. Your boys could teach college courses on animal care and compassion. As they prepared to leave the shelter, Samuel approached Daniel with a serious expression. Will you come back next week? If you'd like me to. I would. The animals like you, and it's more fun when we're all together. Gabriel nodded in agreement. You did good work today. Linda said you didn't complain once, even when Princess threw up on your shoes. Princess has excellent aim, Daniel said, looking down at his expensive leather shoes with resignation rather than irritation. Michael looked up from the notebook where he had been recording the day's observations. Your willingness to engage in unpleasant tasks without complaint suggests a level of commitment that I find encouraging. Thank you, Michael. I think. Raphael showed Daniel his sketchbook, which now included several drawings of Daniel working with various animals. In one, he was kneeling beside a kennel, his expression focused and gentle as he cleaned water. Bowls. In another, he was holding a particularly resistant cat while Linda administered medication. You look like you belong here, Raphael said simply. The comment hit Daniel harder than any business compliment he had ever received. Looking like he belonged somewhere that mattered to his sons felt like the greatest achievement of his life. As they drove back toward downtown Chicago, the boys chatted about the animals they had worked with and the progress various rescue cases were making. Daniel found himself genuinely interested in their stories, asking questions about specific animals and making mental notes about their individual interests and concerns. Daniel, Gabriel said as they approached Daniel's building, would you like to have dinner with us tomorrow night? Mom found a pizza place that delivers to the hotel, and Monday is family movie night. Daniel glanced at Rebecca, who gave him a slight nod. I'd like that very much. Good, but you should know that we vote on movies democratically, and Samuel always votes for animated films about talking animals. This week we're watching a movie about penguins, Samuel announced. Proudly. It's actually a documentary about emperor penguin mating and nesting behaviors, Michael corrected. Quite fascinating from a biological perspective. It has cute baby penguins, Samuel said firmly, as if that settled any academic discussion. Daniel smiled, realizing that his Monday evening would be spent eating pizza and watching documentaries about penguins, with 4 9-year-old boys who were gradually becoming the most important people in his life. 6 months ago, such an evening would have seemed like a waste of valuable time. Now it felt like the most worthwhile way he could possibly spend those hours. As the car pulled up to his building, Rebecca spoke quietly. Daniel, this isn't a trial period where you get to decide whether you want to commit to being their father. If you're going to be part of their lives, it needs to be permanent. They can't handle another abandonment. I understand. Do you? Because once you cross this line, there's no going back without causing them real harm. Daniel looked back at the 4 boys, who were already making plans for his next visit to the animal shelter and debating whether he would enjoy the penguin documentary. I crossed that line the moment I met them. I just didn't realize it until now. Rebecca studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, we'll see you tomorrow at 6. As Daniel stood on the sidewalk watching the car disappear into Chicago traffic, he realized that his entire definition of success was undergoing a fundamental transformation. For 20 years, he had measured achievement in terms of money earned, deals closed, and power accumulated. Now he found himself thinking about small victories, like earning the trust of rescue animals and the approval of 4 9-year-old boys who saw the world with clarity he envied. The expensive clothes he wore felt like costumes from a life that no longer fit him. The penthouse apartment above seemed designed for someone he used to be, rather than the person he was becoming. Everything about his carefully constructed existence suddenly felt hollow, compared to the simple pleasure of spending Sunday afternoon helping animals with his sons. As he rode the elevator to his apartment, Daniel made several mental notes. He needed to buy appropriate clothes for volunteer work. He needed to research penguin documentaries so he could participate meaningfully in family movie night. He needed to learn everything he could about soccer, since the boys played every Saturday morning. Most importantly, he needed to figure out how to be the father his sons deserved while dismantling the emotional barriers he had spent decades constructing. It would be the most challenging project he had ever undertaken, but also the most important. The penthouse felt even emptier than usual as Daniel changed out of his stained clothes and surveyed the damage to his expensive shoes. In the past, ruining a pair of shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent would have irritated him. Now he found himself thinking about keeping them as a reminder of the day he had started learning what really mattered. His phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. "Thank you for today. The boys haven't stopped talking about you since we got back to the hotel." Daniel stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Thank you for giving me a chance to know them. I'll see you tomorrow at 6. As he prepared for bed that night, Daniel realized that for the first time in 10 years, he was genuinely excited about the future, not because of a business opportunity or financial gain, but because tomorrow evening he would share pizza and penguin documentaries with 4 remarkable boys who were teaching him how to be human again. The transformation wouldn't be easy, and he suspected there would be challenges ahead that would test his commitment in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But as he drifted off to sleep, Daniel found himself looking forward to every difficult, messy, wonderful moment of learning how to be their father. 3 months had passed since that first awkward meeting in Daniel's office, and the rhythm of their new life together had settled into something that felt surprisingly natural. Saturday mornings found Daniel on the sidelines of youth soccer, fields cheering as Gabriel demonstrated his leadership skills as team captain, while his brothers each contributed their unique talents to the game. Michael approached soccer with scientific precision, calculating angles and trajectories that often resulted in unexpected strategic plays. Raphael's artistic eye helped him anticipate the flow of the game in ways that surprised even experienced coaches. Samuel's infectious enthusiasm lifted the entire team's spirits even when they were losing. Sunday afternoons at the animal shelter had become sacred time for all of them. Daniel had purchased an entirely new wardrobe of practical clothes, and Linda had begun assigning him increasingly complex tasks as his skills and confidence grew. The boys had started referring to him as their shelter dad, a title that meant more to Daniel than any professional recognition he had ever received. Tuesday family dinners had expanded beyond pizza and documentaries to include cooking experiments where 4 9-year-old boys attempted to teach a millionaire how to make grilled cheese sandwiches without burning them. Rebecca often watched these culinary disasters with barely contained laughter, documenting the chaos with her phone camera as Daniel learned that his business negotiation skills did not translate to mediating disputes about optimal cheese-to-bread ratios. The penthouse apartment had undergone subtle transformations as well. The sterile perfection of expensive furniture and abstract art had given way to a more lived-in atmosphere. Soccer cleats by the door, art supplies scattered across the dining table, science books occupying space on shelves previously reserved for financial journals, and the constant background noise of 4 active boys had breathed life into rooms. that had been empty for too long. Margaret had initially been skeptical of the changes in Daniel's schedule and priorities, but even she had been won over when the boys visited the office one afternoon. Gabriel had asked thoughtful questions about business operations. Michael had engaged her in a discussion about statistical analysis methods. Raphael had admired the architectural details of the building, and Samuel had convinced her to show them the executive floor's hidden candy stash that she maintained for particularly stressful days. Rebecca had gradually relaxed her watchful supervision, allowing Daniel more independent time with the boys as he proved his commitment through consistent presence rather than grand gestures. She had even begun staying in his guest room occasionally, when the boys wanted extra time for weekend projects or when hotel accommodations became inconvenient. Everything seemed to be progressing toward the kind of family dynamic that Daniel had never imagined possible, which made Gabriel's announcement on a cold February morning all the more shocking. "We need to talk to you about something important," Gabriel said with the serious tone he reserved for matters of family business. The four boys had arranged themselves on Daniel's living room couch in their characteristic formation, with Gabriel serving as spokesman while his brothers provided moral support and additional perspective. Daniel set down his coffee mug and gave them his full attention. Over the past months, he had learned that when Gabriel used that particular tone, the conversation was guaranteed to be significant. "It's about our father," Michael said, adjusting his glasses in the precise way he did when preparing to deliver complex information. Daniel felt his stomach drop. The boys still didn't know his true relationship to them, and he had been wrestling with the timing of that revelation for weeks. Rebecca had been pressing him to find the right moment, warning that their growing bond made the deception increasingly dangerous to their trust. "What about your father?" Daniel asked carefully. "We know who he is," Samuel said simply, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by unusual gravity. "We've known for a while now," Raphael added, his sketchbook closed in his lap, a sign that this conversation had his complete focus. Daniel's heart began racing. Had Rebecca told them? Had they somehow discovered the truth on their own? Had he inadvertently revealed something during one of their many conversations about family and genetics and the importance of honesty in relationships? "What do you know?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Gabriel reached into his backpack and pulled out a manila folder that Daniel recognized with growing dread. It was identical to the ones Rebecca had brought to his office months earlier, containing medical records and genetic testing results that documented the complex scientific process that had brought the boys into existence. "We found these in Mum's suitcase last week when we were looking for extra soccer socks," Gabriel explained. "She had copies of everything hidden in a secret compartment." Michael opened the folder and began spreading documents across the coffee table with the methodical approach he brought to all his research projects. The genetic testing results were particularly illuminating. The anomalies in our DNA markers correspond exactly to the experimental procedures described in these medical journals. "You read medical journals?" Daniel asked, though he was no longer surprised by the depth of Michael's intellectual curiosity. "I've been researching advanced reproductive technology ever since Mom mentioned that our conception involved some unusual medical procedures. The science is fascinating, though the ethical implications are somewhat complex." Raphael leaned forward, his artistic eye focused on Daniel's expression. "We also found photographs of you and Mom when you were younger. You look exactly like us when we smile, especially around the eyes." Samuel, who had been unusually quiet during the explanation, suddenly moved to sit beside Daniel on his chair. "Are you our dad?" he asked with the directness that only children can manage. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Daniel realized that this moment had been inevitable from the beginning. 4 intelligent, observant children raised by a mother who valued honesty and education were bound to piece together the truth eventually. The only real surprise was that it had taken them this long. "Yes," Daniel said quietly, "I'm your father." The simple acknowledgement seemed to release tension that Daniel hadn't realized had been building for months. Gabriel nodded as if confirming. A hypothesis he had already proven. Michael made a note in his ever-present notebook. Raphael smiled and reopened his sketchbook. Samuel climbed completely onto Daniel's lap and wrapped his arms around his neck. "We thought so," Gabriel said matter-of-factly. The evidence was pretty conclusive. "Are you angry that we didn't tell you sooner?" Daniel asked, surprised by how natural it felt to have Samuel curled against his chest. "We understand why you and Mom wanted to wait," Michael said. "Establishing trust and emotional bonds before revealing biological relationships is psychologically sound strategy." Mom was scared," Raphael observed with the emotional intelligence that often surprised adults. "She was worried you might not want us, or that you might want us for the wrong reasons." "What would be the wrong reasons?" Daniel asked. "Guilt, or obligation instead of genuine affection," Gabriel explained. "She didn't want us to have a father who stayed because he had to rather than because he wanted to." Daniel looked at each of his sons, these remarkable young men who had inherited the best qualities of both their parents and somehow emerged as individuals who were wiser and more emotionally mature than many adults he knew. "I want to be your father," he said firmly. "Not because I have to, but because getting to know you four has been the best thing that's ever happened to me." "Good," Samuel said, settling more comfortably in Daniel's lap, "because we want you to be our dad too." "Does this mean we can call you Dad instead of Daniel?" Raphael asked hopefully. The word hit Daniel with unexpected emotional force. Dad. Such a simple title, but one that carried tremendous weight and responsibility and love. "I would like that very much," Daniel managed to say, around the tightness in his throat. "Excellent," Michael said, making another note. "I'll update my contact list accordingly." "There's something else we need to discuss," Gabriel said, his expression growing serious again. "We've been talking, and we think you should marry Mom." Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. "You think I should what?" "Marry Mom," Samuel repeated cheerfully. "She still loves you, you know. She gets that soft look on her face when she talks about you, and she's been humming more lately, which she only does when she's happy." "Marriage is a significant legal and emotional commitment that shouldn't be entered into lightly," Michael added with characteristic precision. "However, our research indicates that children benefit from stable, two-parent households, and you and Mom demonstrate compatible values and complementary skill sets." Raphael nodded enthusiastically. "Plus, you look at her the same way you used to in those old photographs, like she's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen." Daniel realized he was being thoroughly managed by 4 9-year-old boys who had apparently been planning this conversation for weeks. "Marriage is complicated. Guys, your mother and I have a lot of history to work through." "What kind of history?" Gabriel asked. Daniel considered how to explain the complexities of adult relationships to children who saw the world in terms of problems to be solved and goals to be achieved. "We hurt each other's feelings very badly 10 years ago. Sometimes when people hurt each other, it takes time to learn how to trust again." "Do you trust her now?" Samuel asked. "Yes." "Does she trust you now?" Raphael wanted to know. Daniel thought about the gradual evolution of Rebecca's wariness into acceptance, her willingness to let him be alone with the boys, her increasing comfort with sharing parenting decisions and daily responsibilities. "I think so, yes." "Do you love her?" Michael asked with scientific curiosity. The question hit Daniel like a revelation. Did he love Rebecca? He had loved the young woman she used to be, but that relationship had been built on passion and possibility rather than the deeper understanding that came from shared responsibility and mutual respect. The Rebecca he was getting to know now was stronger, wiser, more confident and more beautiful than the woman he had lost 10 years ago. Yes, he admitted, I love her very much. Then the logical solution is obvious, Gabriel concluded. You should propose to her. It's not that simple. Why not? All four boys asked simultaneously. Daniel looked around at their expectant faces and realized he didn't have a good answer. Why wasn't it that simple? Rebecca was an extraordinary woman who had raised 4 amazing children while building a successful career. She had demonstrated grace, intelligence, and forgiveness in allowing him back into their lives. She had shown patience with his learning process and trust in his growing commitment to their family. Most importantly, she had given him the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to know his sons and learn how to be their father. I don't know if she wants to marry me, Daniel said finally. Only one way to find out, Samuel said, with 9-year-old logic. Ask her, Raphael suggested helpfully. But do it properly, Gabriel added with his characteristic attention to detail. Mom likes romantic gestures, but she appreciates sincerity more than expensive displays. She also has strong opinions about gender equality and mutual respect. In relationships, Michael contributed, any proposal should acknowledge her autonomy and independence. Daniel stared at his sons, amazed by their perceptiveness and touched by their obvious desire to see their parents together. When did you 4 become relationship experts? We pay attention, Gabriel said simply, and we want our family to be complete. Before Daniel could respond, they heard the sound of Rebecca's key in the door. She had been spending more nights in the guest room lately, especially when the boys had early morning activities or late evening events that made the hotel inconvenient. That's Mom, Samuel whispered unnecessarily. Remember, act natural. We weren't planning to announce your matchmaking schemes, Daniel assured him. Rebecca entered the living room, carrying coffee for herself and grocery bags that suggested she was planning to make breakfast for everyone. She paused when she saw the serious expressions around the coffee table and the scattered documents that told the story of the boys' discovery. I see you've had an important conversation, she said carefully, setting down her bags and studying Daniel's face for clues about how the revelation had gone. We told him we know he's our dad, Samuel announced proudly. And we discussed the logical next steps in family consolidation, Michael added. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Family consolidation? We think you and Dad should get married, Raphael said, with the enthusiasm of someone presenting an obvious solution to a simple problem. Rebecca's coffee mug stopped halfway to her lips. You think we should what? Get married, Gabriel repeated. It makes sense from every perspective we've analyzed. Daniel watched Rebecca's face cycle through surprise, amusement, and something that might have been hope before settling into the careful neutrality she used when processing unexpected developments. Marriage is a big decision, she said slowly. It's not something people do just because it makes logical sense. But you love each other, Samuel pointed out with irrefutable 9-year-old logic. How do you know that? Rebecca asked. Because you get happy when he calls, and you've stopped frowning when people ask if you're dating anyone, Raphael explained. And Dad gets that soft look when he talks about you, and he's been reading parenting books and asking Margaret about family vacation destinations. Daniel shot a look at Margaret's supposed confidentiality, making a mental note to discuss information security with his assistant. Plus, He bought a family-sized car last week instead of his usual sports car, Gabriel added. That suggests long-term planning for group transportation needs. Rebecca looked at Daniel with surprise. You bought a family car? A 7-seater SUV, Daniel admitted. I thought it might be useful for soccer practice and field trips and family outings. See, Michael said triumphantly, clear evidence of commitment to family integration. Rebecca sat down slowly, clearly overwhelmed by the morning's revelations and her son's comprehensive analysis of her romantic life. Boys, could you give me and your father a few minutes to talk privately? We'll go make breakfast, Gabriel announced, leading his brothers toward the kitchen. But remember, we're very invested in a positive outcome to this discussion. After the boys disappeared into the kitchen, accompanied by the sounds of industrious meal preparation and whispered strategy sessions, Rebecca turned to face Daniel fully. So they figured it out, she said. They're too smart for their own good and apparently too observant. How do you feel about them knowing? Daniel considered the question seriously. Relieved, excited, terrified, complete. Complete. For the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am and what I want. I'm their father, and I want to be their father for the rest of my life. I want to teach them about business and learn from them about everything else. I want to be there for soccer games and science fairs and art shows and heartbreaks and graduations and weddings and grandchildren. Rebecca smiled softly. That's a long-term commitment. The longest and most important one I'll ever make. And what about their suggestion regarding marriage? Daniel looked toward the kitchen, where his sons were conducting an animated discussion about optimal pancake-to-syrup ratios, while clearly straining to overhear their parents' conversation. I think, Daniel said carefully, that they may be on to something. Rebecca's expression grew serious. Daniel, we can't get married just because the boys think it's logical. Marriage has to be about more than creating a stable family structure. I agree completely. It has to be about love and partnership and choosing each other every day, not just providing our sons with the nuclear family they think they want. I agree with that too. It has to be about two people who are committed to growing together and supporting each other's dreams and building something that's bigger than either of them could create alone. Rebecca, Daniel interrupted gently, are you trying to talk me out of proposing to you, or are you explaining why you'd say yes if I did? She stared at him for a moment, then laughed with the same melodic sound that had first captured his attention years ago. I honestly don't know. Daniel stood up and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Then let me make... It's simple. Rebecca Martinez, I love you. I love the woman you were 10 years ago, but I'm completely in love with the woman you've become. You're brilliant and strong and beautiful, and the most amazing mother I could have imagined for our sons. Tears began forming in Rebecca's eyes, but she didn't interrupt. I love how you've taught them to be kind and curious and confident. I love how you've shown them that intelligence and compassion aren't mutually exclusive. I love how you've raised them to see the world as a place full of possibilities rather than obstacles. Daniel, I love that you gave me a second chance when you had every reason not to. I love that you've been patient with my learning process and generous with your trust. I love that you've let me be part of something beautiful and important and meaningful. The sounds from the kitchen had grown suspiciously quiet, suggesting that four boys were straining to hear every word of their father's impromptu proposal. Most of all, Daniel continued, I love that when I imagine my future now, I can't picture it without you and our sons in it. Not because it's logical or practical or convenient, but because you've become the center of everything that matters. To me, Rebecca was crying openly now, though she was also smiling in a way that made Daniel's heart race with hope. So yes, I want to marry you. I want to be your husband and their father and part of this incredible family you've created. Will you marry me? For a moment, the only sounds in the apartment were the distant hum of the city and the barely contained excitement of four boys trying not to breathe too loudly in the kitchen. Yes, Rebecca whispered, then more loudly, yes, Daniel, I'll marry you. The kitchen erupted in cheers and celebration as four boys abandoned any pretense of giving their parents privacy. They rushed into the living room with Samuel launching himself at both Rebecca and Daniel, while his brothers surrounded them with hugs and high fives and excited planning for the wedding they had apparently been designing for weeks. Can we have the wedding at the animal shelter? Samuel asked hopefully. I've been researching optimal venues for family ceremonies, Michael announced. I have 17 potential locations ranked by various criteria. I want to design the invitations, Raphael declared, and maybe paint a portrait of our family to hang in our new house. New house? Rebecca asked, wiping tears from her cheeks while trying to keep track of her son's rapid-fire wedding planning. We've been looking at real estate listings, Gabriel explained matter-of-factly. Dad's penthouse is nice, but it's not really designed for family life. We need a house with a yard and space for everyone to have their own rooms, and maybe room for some pets. Daniel looked at Rebecca with amazement. They've thought of everything. They get that from both of us, she replied, then leaned over to kiss him, while their sons cheered and began making plans for a life that would be chaotic and challenging and absolutely perfect. 6 months later, Daniel stood in the backyard of their new house in Evanston, watching his sons play with the golden retriever puppy that Samuel had successfully lobbied to adopt from the shelter. Rebecca was beside him, her hand resting on her growing belly, where their fifth child was developing through a much more conventional process than the scientific miracle that had given them the quadruplets. The wedding had been exactly what the boys had envisioned, a small ceremony at the animal shelter with Linda officiating as a licensed minister, followed by a reception where rescue dogs served as unofficial wedding party members. Michael had handled logistics with military precision. Raphael had designed invitations that were works of art in themselves. Gabriel had served as best man with characteristic dignity, and Samuel had insisted on releasing butterflies during the ceremony, because he thought married people should be surrounded by beautiful things. Margaret had cried during the vows, and even the most hardened investors in Daniel's firm had admitted that the family photos from the wedding showed a happiness that money couldn't buy. The new house was everything the old penthouse had not. Being warm, lived in, designed for comfort rather than display. The boys had their own rooms, but still chose to have sleepovers in each other's spaces most weekends. Daniel's home office doubled as homework central, where he helped with math problems while learning more about ancient civilizations, marine biology, and artistic techniques than he had ever expected. The animal shelter had named Daniel Volunteer of the Year, though he suspected the award was really recognition for the substantial donation he had made to expand their facilities. His Saturdays were still spent on soccer sidelines, but now he served as assistant coach and team photographer, roles that Gabriel and his brothers had decided he was uniquely qualified to handle. Business continued to thrive, though Daniel's definition of success had evolved considerably. He measured achievement now in terms of bedtime stories read, science fair projects completed, art shows attended, and soccer goals celebrated. The key financial empire he had built provided security for his family, but it no longer defined his worth as a person. "Dad!" Gabriel called from across the yard, where he was teaching the puppy to fetch, while his brothers offered conflicting advice about optimal training techniques. "Are you going to help us build that treehouse you promised, or are you just going to stand there looking sentimental?" Daniel laughed and kissed Rebecca's forehead before heading toward his sons, who were already debating the engineering requirements for their ambitious construction project. As he joined them in planning what was sure to be the most over-engineered treehouse in the neighborhood, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 10 years ago, he had thought success meant accumulating wealth and power. 5 years ago, he had been convinced that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. 6 months ago, he had been a stranger to his own children. Now he was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by the people who had taught him what it meant to be truly wealthy. The quadruplets who had been created through scientific innovation had given him the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to learn how to be human. The birth certificates that had once stunned him with their genetic anomalies now hung framed in his office, not as evidence of medical mystery, but as proof that families could be created in ways that science was only beginning to understand. Love, he had learned, was far more complex and beautiful than any genetic code. As Samuel's laughter echoed across the yard and Rebecca called them all in for dinner, Daniel realized that his life had finally become exactly what he had never known he wanted. Complete, chaotic, challenging, and absolutely perfect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.